Okay, welcome to Santa Monica Karma Thegsum Chöling. We're a nonprofit Buddhist organization based in SoCal, Southern California. We've had meetings every week for about 20 years. And this program is with Lama Kathy, who resides at the Columbus KTC in Columbus, Ohio. And tonight's topic is an ongoing topic, which is Joyful Wisdom, written by Mingyur Rinpoche. And Lama Kathy brings together her experience as a Lama and practical day-to-day ways we can put joyful wisdom to good use. So Lama Kathy, I don't like to talk a lot about these intros, so I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel, and all of the members and friends of the SoCal Karma Thegsum Chöling Center. I'm really happy to be able to spend this time with you and talk about the Dharma. And before we get started, I would like to place our attitude and motivation as one of being of benefit, not just to ourselves, but to all sentient beings. So we can begin by generating the feeling of taking refuge in the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the path, the Sangha as the community, and also think I am going to listen to this Dharma talk today with the intention that it bring about the enlightenment of myself and all suffering beings. And so having this altruistic motivation, we're going to sit and be quiet and meditate for just a very short period of time to allow our minds to calm down from our busy day and bring us closer to the intention of benefiting self and others through studying the Dharma. So we'll be quiet for just a few moments. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to sit in silence with you all, creating this atmosphere of goodness so that we can talk about Dharma together. So thank you. This evening, I'm going to continue my discussion of and talk about our discussion of this wonderful book, Joyful Wisdom, by Mingyur Rinpoche. He's of course extremely well known for his teachings on meditating on the nature of mind and the nature of awareness. And we are currently in chapter 8 of the book, which is entitled Insight. In previous chapters, he talked about the rationale behind doing the practice of meditation, and then he taught the basics of calm abiding meditation. And now in the second part of the book, he's teaching insight, where we come to understand what mind is. first in the early chapters, he shows us how to recognize the activity of the mind. Remember, he talks a little bit about monkey mind and how busy the mind can be, and how the practice of meditation helps us to work with this constantly moving, restless monkey mind. And I'll never forget his powerful advice. If you need to work with your monkey mind, give your monkey mind a job. And the job is noticing the activity of the mind and returning attention to the mind when the activity in the mind seeks to draw our attention away. So this continuous returning back to the object of meditation, whether it's the breath or basic awareness, this returning again and again and again with the discipline of meditation helps us to become acquainted with the mind and its activities. And now in chapter 8, he wants us to understand what it's like to work with the mind directly. And so in the previous class, we talked a little bit about the word emptiness. And we talked about the fact that even though the word emptiness gets used a lot to describe mind, that the word doesn't really mean zero or nothing. It actually means all potential. In other words, remember we were talking last time about how His Eminence Taisich Rinpoche uses the word limitlessness instead of emptiness. He said, mind is limitless. And it has no color, it has no shape, it has no discernible material reality, it has no place where it resides. It has no beginning, it has no end, and so on. And by looking at the mind over and over again, we begin to get an idea of what this mind is, this mind that is not a material thing, and yet is not nothing, because mind possesses the capacity for experience, and this experience includes our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our perceptions, and so on. So last time, he took us on a little journey to find the self. If you remember last class, we talked about His Eminence Taisich Rinpoche's commentary, where he said the mind is vast and limitless. But what do we do when we feel this vast limitlessness of mind? He said we react, and we seek to take this huge limitless mind and squeeze it and push it down into the smallest possible box. And we label that box me or I or self. And then in the class last time, Mingyur Rinpoche talked about questioning the self, asking ourselves questions about the self. And remember he said, is my I, by that he doesn't mean the organ of sight. Am I myself, is this mind that is I, and so forth. Is it inside the body? Is it outside the body? And coming to grips with these questions, we come to an at least intellectual understanding, and possibly even a little feeling that mind might not be a solid and permanent thing. So now that he's given us this explanation of how the self is essentially a fiction based on our experience of mind's limitlessness and mind's manifestations, thoughts, feelings, and emotions. By seeing how the mind misapprehends its limitlessness as a self, now he's going to talk about how mind misapprehends its radiance, its experiential quality as what we perceive to be or think of as being a real external world of others. So we're going to be on, for those of you who are studying with the paperback, or I'm sorry, I have the hardback here, but with the paper book, we're on page 178. And we're going to talk about the empty other. Last time we talked about the empty I, but this time we're talking about the empty other. So now he says, joining shamatha or shine, both of those words mean calm abiding and refer to the basic tranquility meditation we've all learned. Joining shamatha with an understanding of emptiness, he said, doesn't mean that we deny relative reality. Relative reality is the framework within which we operate in this world. So it has relative reality, but ultimately it's not what we think it is. And so he says, relative reality is a framework in which we operate, and the denial of that framework, he said, is the path of madness. And he references a story he told previously about a person who wanted to do away with his concept of self by refusing to say the word I, or refusing to say the word me. And so he did a lot of, shall we say, I'm going to call it contortion, sort of like conceptual contortionism, to try to avoid ever saying the word I or me, thinking that that would somehow bring him to emptiness. It didn't work, and it didn't work in a big way, but that's a whole nother story we don't need to tell tonight. But in the middle of this first paragraph, where he talks about the relative reality we live in, and he said, but he said there is a third level of experience, which I call fake relative reality. That's what he calls it, fake relative reality. In it, ideas, feelings, and perceptions are intimately bound up in our perception of ourselves, other people, sensations, and situations. Then he explains fake relative reality is the main source of self-created suffering. It emerges from our attachment to feelings, ideas, perceptions about ourselves and others, as well as perceived characteristics. So he says, after he said, we get a little bit of, well, let's take a moment to look at this fake relative reality. If you remember from one of the earlier teachings, we talked about the four, that we all have Buddha nature, but we don't realize it until we practice meditation for a long time and deeply under the tutelage or the instruction of a master. And the reason that we don't experience Buddha nature, even though we all have it, is said to be because we do not possess the teachings on how to uncover Buddha nature, how to see through the fake relative reality of the concept of self, the concept of other, the concept of relationship, dualism, and so on. And so what he says here is that this fake relative reality, I am real, this thing is real, and I must have this thing or I won't be happy, whatever that thing is. It could be an accomplishment, it could be a possession, it could be a person. We perceive that having that thing will give us happiness. So we look to external world to supply our happiness. And this is why Mingyur Rinpoche said that this fake relative reality and our involvement with it is what causes all of our self-created suffering. We think something will bring us happiness, we get it, and then we generally ruin our ability to enjoy it in one way or another by clinging to it too tightly. I remember Bardo Toku Rinpoche said one time, he said, "Oh, human beings, we're so talented. And what are we most talented at?" He said, "We are most talented at destroying our ability to enjoy life." Because we cling to everything and we wanted either to never change or to change instantly. So by seeing things as other than they are, grasping and wanting to change things, we continue to suffer. So that's a little bit about what Mingyur Rinpoche is labeling as fake relative reality here. So he said, after we gain a little bit of experience and looking at this emptiness of the I, remember last time we talked about questioning whether I is a real reality or a fiction? And he said, once we gain a little bit of experience in looking at the emptiness of I, or the looker, as one of his students named it, we can begin to investigate the emptiness of what or whom we are looking at, the object of this awareness that we possess. He said the process is perhaps best achieved by examining our experience with the intent to recognize the division of each moment of awareness into a looker or a watcher and the thing that is looked at. The thing that is looked at. And then what we have to do is we have to see that this is essentially, he says, a conceptual invention. So he said the Buddha often discussed this division of perception in terms of a dream. In the dream, we have a perception of me or I and a perception of other. And of course, most of the Buddha's examples, Mingyur Rinpoche says, were relevant to the people of his time and place, such as dreaming that you're being chased by a lion or a tiger. Not very many of us are chased by lions and tigers these days, he said, although some people have told Mingyur Rinpoche, he said, that they are being chased by monsters or in their dreams, or that they find themselves lost in either a big house or a big landscape. And then he says, but there might be a more contemporary example. Let's say you dream that you have a very expensive watch and that you've been given this watch and it's a very precious thing to you. And that somewhere in the dream, someone sees your watch and wants to steal your watch, and they steal it. Maybe they even hurt you and attack you and steal your watch. Then he says, the pain that you experience in the dream would feel very real inside the dream. And your sorrow over losing the watch may be quite intense. He said, you have, let's say that in your dream, you have no dream insurance to protect your dream watch. And then you wake up from the dream sweating or crying because it all seems so intense and so real. But this expensive watch was just a dream, wasn't it? He says. And the joy, pain, and grief you experience were all part of that dream. In the context of the dream, they all appeared to be real. But when you woke up from the dream, you didn't have an expensive watch. There was no thief, and your hand or wrist had not been injured by the thief stealing your watch. And then he says, the idea of the watch, the thief, the wounds, and so forth occurred as expressions of your mind's inherent emptiness and clarity. In other words, your mind's basic emptiness and your mind's basic clarity in the context of the dream were appearing as a watch, a situation, a thief, and so on. Then he says, in a similar way, whatever we experience in terms of relative reality, this fake relative reality, can be compared to the experiences we undergo in a dream. They seem very real, but they are ultimately just reflections of the union of emptiness and clarity. Now, a lot of this depends on our own understanding of emptiness and clarity and our own meditative experience of emptiness and clarity. So if we haven't had a lot of meditative experience seeing the basic empty nature of things, then we're going to find this example a little confusing. this is why when I talk about these examples, I frequently reference a book that's on my shelf over here. Let's see if I can grab it real quick. It's this book, The Great Path of Awakening. I often reference this book because in this book, there's an example given about the difference between apparent reality, objects like this that are made of matter and so on. The apparent objects and appearances that arise in our mind based on our perception of apparent objects. So the object has a relative reality, but it's not permanent reality. This object, for example, being made of matter, is subject to the rules of matter, and it has a beginning and an end, and it's made of parts, and all of those parts are made of parts, and so forth and so on. And so this glass only has a relative reality. Ultimately, it doesn't exist in the way it appears to exist. So that's what an apparent object is. But the appearance of this glass in my mind, definitely is not real. It's not made of matter. The glass that's appearing in my mind is not a real glass. And the object in my dream is not a real object. And so appearances really are just expressions of mind's emptiness and clarity. Sometimes they use, instead of the word clarity, they use the word luminosity or radiance. So in this way, if we differentiate between apparent objects and appearances, we can see that apparent objects have are interdependent, depending on conditions for their existence, interdependent and impermanent. And the appearances are definitely not real, not permanent, not solid, and not unchanging. And so in this way, if we can make this differentiation, then we can begin to see through the illusion of this relative fake reality. And Shantideva goes into this in some detail in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, where he says the person is the person who says abusive words to me. He said the words themselves have no existence. They're just the movement of sound in space. It is my perception and my habitual clinging to self that interprets those sound waves into an insult that I then respond to. But he said, ultimately, there is nothing about the situation that's real in an ultimate sense. Relatively, yes, but ultimately, no. And so the Buddha warned people about this, however. He said, you can't think that relative reality doesn't have relative existence. He said, because, and my teacher said that because even though relative reality is relative, it still operates in our life. And so when we try to run into a wall, we will still hurt ourselves. So we can't think that, oh, yes, it's all emptiness and I can just walk through this wall, wham, because we haven't achieved the state of enlightenment, such as beings like Milarepa, who could walk through walls and could fly in the sky and so forth. We have to recognize that until we have reached that state ourselves, we have to respect relative reality and not jump in front of cars or any of this type of thing. And also we have to remember that the relative reality of karma is also a real thing for us, a relatively real thing for us now. Karma is real, and we will suffer the consequences in relative reality as long as we are in relative reality. So I'll never forget one time I had to teach on the Heart Sutra, and the Lama of the center was very worried that people would listen to the teaching on the Heart Sutra and think, oh my gosh, karma is not real. I'm going to go out and go crazy and do all kinds of bad things because karma is not real. And so I said, don't worry, Lama, I will every single session of this class, I will have somebody read the words of Milarepa, who said, until you have reached the state of true awakening, you must respect karma. And so that helped a lot. In any case, coming back to Mingyur Rinpoche, sorry about that. Digression. What he is saying here is he's encouraging us to practice a little example, and this is on page 180. He says, take a few moments to sit in a physical posture that is both relaxed and alert. Then he says, take a few moments to rest in objectless attention, meaning that you rest the mind in its experience of its own awareness. Then he said, rest your attention lightly on an object, a visual form, or a sound, or a physical sensation. He said, isn't that nice? Isn't that relaxing? He said, but where is that visual sound? I mean, is that visual form, that sound, that physical, where is it actually occurring? Is this physical perception happening inside the brain, or is it somewhere out there, outside the body? He said, rather than analyze where these sensations and so forth and sounds are actually occurring, just look at them or listen or feel them as if they were reflections in the mirror of the mind. Look at the visual object or hear the sound. And allow yourself to relax in the experience of seeing or the experience of hearing. And he said, think of your experience as being like looking at the reflection of a tree, perhaps, in a lake. Or seeing this object in a mirror. He says, the object of awareness, the awareness of the object, and the one who is aware of the object are all occurring simultaneously. Just like looking in an ordinary mirror. These appearances are appearing in your mind. Without the mirror, there would be nothing to be seen. But without the seer, there would be no one to see. Joined together, they make seeing possible. The one who's looking, the item, and the process. So then Mingyur Rinpoche completes this by saying, insight, this kind of practice, insight practice, offers a way of relating to experience that involves turning the mind inward to look at the mind that is experiencing that object. It's like you're not looking at the object, but looking at the mind that's experiencing that object. He says, This process may be difficult to understand until you try it for yourself. It takes some practice, he says, of course, and the recognition of mind arising simultaneously with experience. The sense of, he said, one of his students described it as bigness, may only last a second or two when you begin doing this. Only 1 second or 2 seconds. The temptation, he said, in such cases would be to say to oneself, oh, I've got it. I really understand emptiness. Now I can get on with my life and feel like I'm totally free. He said, the temptation, he said, is particularly strong when working with thoughts and emotions, as well as the way we relate to others and to various situations. He said, the brief glimpses of insight that we get can harden into concepts, which you see is what I or me or the self is really good at. We're really good. Remember what Bardo Rinpoche said? We're very good at holding onto and solidifying and conceptualizing things to the extent that we don't really experience them anymore, that we're just experiencing an idea, and we grasp that idea very tightly so that if somebody challenges our idea, then we get really angry. So he said, the brief glimpses of insight can harden into concepts that can lead us into paths of perception or behavior that may be harmful to ourselves or others. He said, there's an old story about a man who spent many years in a cave meditating on emptiness. Inside his cave were many mice. One day, a rather large mouse jumped up on the stone that served as his table. Aha, the man thought, the mouse is emptiness. And he grabbed his shoe and killed the mouse, thinking, the mouse is emptiness, my shoe is emptiness, and killing the mouse is emptiness. But all he had really done was solidify the idea, taking the idea, the intellectual idea of emptiness, and solidifying it into a concept that nothing exists. So he could do whatever he wanted and feel whatever he felt without experiencing any consequence. So he said, when we turn the mind to look at the mind, whether we are looking for self or me, or we're looking for other thoughts or feelings, he said, we can begin very slowly to see the mind itself. We become open to the possibility that the mind, which is itself the union of emptiness and clarity, is capable of reflecting anything. We're not stuck seeing one thing, but are capable of seeing many possibilities. And what's interesting is that this is where the chapter ends, and then he moves on in chapter 9 to the topic of emptiness. I'm sorry, the topic of empathy as a consequence of learning about emptiness. Now, this may seem to like a jarring shift from talking about the empty nature of all things to the feeling of empathy for others. But they're not that entirely divorced from one another. Because Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche told us one time, he said, when people have not just this flash of insight into the nature of emptiness, but they relinquish their hold on that concept. I had a flash of emptiness, and then you solidify that and destroy that. I mean, it's a mess, right? So he said, when people are studying under a good teacher who tells them when they get it right and tells them when they get it wrong, I mean, if that if that poor teacher, if that poor yogi who killed the mouse had a good teacher, right, had been able to hear the words of a good teacher, his misunderstandings would have been corrected a lot earlier. So if we are nurtured by good teachers who tell us when we get it right and guide us when we get it wrong, then we can begin to see how a lot of our own suffering is indeed self-created. And when we see how we create our own suffering, then there is a moment, and for many of us, it happens early, and some it happens later, when we realize that everyone is experiencing what we are experiencing, that everyone has this fake ego fixation that they're walking around in. They're walking around in this concept of I or me. I use the example of a cardboard box. We're all walking around in the idea, I am this kind of person, or I am that kind of person. I am this kind of person, and this is me. So it's like I'm walking around with a box on my head and I'm saying, this is me. But really, I'm not that, but I don't know that. So I'm walking around in my box. And then suddenly I'm bumping into other people who are also walking around in their box. And so my fake idea of who I think I am keeps bumping up against their fake idea of who they think they are. And we just all go wandering around, bumping into each other and causing terrible problems. But once we realize that this is the situation, we can begin to take the box off and to practice the methods of meditation of gradually getting to see how our concept of self is based on a fiction. And when we begin to see that we are something beyond these things, and we see how much we create our own suffering, then we see how everybody else is also creating their own suffering. And when we understand this, then we can begin to feel some small kinship and empathy for their suffering, and have a sense that that person is suffering because of their grasping and fixation. And that glimmer of emptiness, that glimmer of emptiness and that glimmer of empathy then can lead us into experiencing a deeper sense of compassion and loving kindness. And that can also help us to relinquish our hold on ego fixation. So ultimate truth and relative truth, they come together in the practice of compassion. So I think I'll stop here for now, because we've now moved into chapter 9, entitled Empathy, and it starts with a quotation from Albert Einstein, who says, a human being is part of a whole that is called by us the universe. So there we have it. If you have questions or things you're curious about, you can use the raise hand function, or and we'll take these one at a time. And I see that Daniel has raised his hand. Yes.
Yes. Your description of attachment and clinging, it reminded me of the movie Lord of the Rings. When I first saw Lord of the Rings and there was that creature who wanted the ring, I must have the ring.
Yeah. It's like my precious, right?
Yeah. And for some reason, when I saw that movie, I'm like, wow, that is like clinging and attachment on steroids.
That's exactly right. And what happens to him? He dies in a lake of fire. But that's kind of a Christian metaphor. But still, right? He grasps it and thinks he has it, and then he falls in a lake of fire and destroys himself and the ring. So yeah, it's like, what? Yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. Thanks for sharing that. those of us who kind of grew up with that book, and yeah, I read it more times than I am ashamed to admit how many times I read that book. Thanks for sharing. Other things that people might want to talk about or ask about. Let's see here. Let me see if I can go to a gallery view here so I can see. Anybody else have any questions or curiosities? Maybe this teaching makes you think of other teachings you've received. Maybe it makes you think of questions that you have about Dharma in general, or the teachings on emptiness in particular. Or maybe you're just kind of tired of talking about emptiness and you'd like to talk about something else. I'm okay with that. Okay, we can also meditate. So I'm good at that. Yeah. No questions? All right then. So let's do about 5 minutes of meditation. Letting the body rest in a posture that's both attentive and relaxed. We formed the motivation to practice shamatha meditation, this tranquility for the purpose of benefiting both ourselves and others. After forming the intention, according to the teachings of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, one begins by taking one deep breath, breathing deeply, and then breathing out. And then you can choose an object of attention. It could be the breath coming in, breath coming out. It could be a visual object in front of you, or you let your attention rest lightly on it and return your attention when your attention wanders. Or it could be resting in mind's natural awareness. So we'll do maybe about 5 minutes of meditation. Thank you. That's a brief session of sitting meditation. I'm really happy to have had this opportunity to sit with you this evening and, and to talk about the book and studying and practicing meditation is helpful to you in your approach to everyday life. And I hope that you'll watch this week and see how much of your suffering is coming from grasping and fixation. And by extension, think about how others suffer exactly in the same way and try to. So thank you. So I guess let's see. Yeah, appreciate you all being here tonight, and let's dedicate some merit. We'll dedicate you know that true negative karma, we accumulate positive karma. And we should practice good practices that are with our relative karma by dedicating it to the benefit of all sentient beings. I'll recite a short prayer. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Thanks, everyone.